It's 4:30 p.m. on April 16th, 2024. I call to order this Budget and Finance Administrative meeting. Moment of silence, please. Mr. Root?
Yes, sir. Pray with me if you'd like to. Dearest Father, help us to slow down. Now, I'm sure we've all been going very busy today. I pray that we pump the brakes a little bit and you help us to listen. During this meeting, during the meeting to follow, that we listen to your guidance, that we would receive your wisdom, that counsel would be directed by your principles, that it would be your meeting now, your meeting later, and that we'd really just be people after your heart. I pray in your name. Amen.
Mr. Davis?
Please stand. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Is there a motion to approve the March 22nd, 2024 budget workshop minutes?
Make the motion.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Let's see, next we've got a presentation of the School District of Coney County for fiscal year 2024-25 budget presentation. Dr. Thornton.
Yeah, and our CFO, Jay Schickling, is here, and he is certainly the expert, so he'll go through the presentation, and then we'll both take questions if you have anything after we finish.
Good evening, everybody. So I've got the privilege of being in front of you tonight to talk about our budget presentation for next year, for our fiscal 25 year. I've got just a brief agenda that I'd like to go over tonight. I will try to encompass what the legislation is right now from the state, what the state has as their locked salary schedule for teachers now, because there's agreement between the House and Senate. And there's some pretty radical reconfiguration that the state is projecting out to the districts. I'll go over a compensation analysis as to where our salary scales compare to our contiguous neighbors or the AOP area at large. I'll go over budget and levy history, our budget projection, and then what the next steps, at least from the district's perspective. So there's a statewide teacher shortage, but I believe that's broadly recognized. It's a concern of the governor, and you've heard language coming from the governor and from the legislature about becoming more competitive and meeting a regional average teacher salary. And so they've made aggressive steps with the state teacher salary to try to achieve that. Recently, Mr. Rainwater in the Fiscal Affairs Office went around to school districts and various entities and conferences to demonstrate some of the analysis that the state completed. And so what they found is that there has been a striking phenomenon of career abandonment by teachers in the first 4 years of their career. So they'll go through a preparatory program, find their first job, ultimately decide this is not what they envisioned themselves doing, and then leave the profession completely. So the conclusion of the state was to re-engineer the salary schedule such that it would attract new entrants to the profession, but also maintain those or retain those that entered the profession and are in their first few years, really learning what the rest of their career is going to be like and hitting their stride. So some of the radical reformations that have been proposed here, first and foremost, the initial or the present state schedule went up to 23 cells. So there were 23 years of experience. This schedule goes to a 28th, so it's adding several levels. The school district of Oconee County currently has 27 steps, so we do have more steps than the state schedule, but would have to add another step to comply with the minimum requirement for the schedule that's currently proposed and locked in. As you can see, the year-over-year increase from the state's current schedule is very aggressive in the bachelor's column. So it would constitute a $4,500 increase for someone entering the profession. That escalates to $5,700 in the first 5 years, over $4,000 by year 10, and then you can read the rest of the chart. So I'll spare you my narration, but that's gradually tapered across the scale, and you can see that it's a minimal increase when you get into that doctorate level. So the funding distribution is very heavily tapered towards entry and masters. At the bottom of that, you can see the constitution of SDOC's teaching staff. So our teaching staff, of course, the composition of our staff would fall into those columns and those cells that would stand to see the greatest increase. So there's a substantial impact to us if we were to take what our local supplement is now and then apply it to the new schedule. So initially, our thought process was, let's start off with that assumption. Let's see if we can make that work financially. And the conclusion was, no, we can't. That's an effort that we simply would not be able to support. So then we took a look at, what is our current compensation and how can we maintain some regional competitiveness. This chart shows the beginning and then every 5-year increment master's teacher scale for the Anderson school districts in Pickens, so that AOP region. At the beginning, SDOC is fairly competitive, just slightly below average. By year 5, we're the lowest in that group, and we remain the lowest of that group until about year 15. For custodians, in particular, the entry-level wages, so when we look at the turnover in staff that keep our buildings clean, the learning environment in good shape for kids, very difficult to recruit staff when we are, again, the lowest in the region as a starting wage per hour. And bus driver across the board, we are the lowest. Last year, we gave a $2.28 minimum per hour increase to our bus drivers, and this was the result of that effort. So again, the actions that have been taken by our counterparts have been radical as well. Last year, we came with a proposal that we believed would help us increase our competitiveness, and we found that this has been the result, is that we're really struggling to keep up with our counterparts around us. So next I'll get into the operations millage. I thought to take a look at how do we compare, and I'll be the first to tell you, I'm new to the region. I moved here a little shy of 2 years ago. And part of my motivation for moving, aside from a difference in climate, was a difference in the tax environment. So, I recognize the benefits of being a resident of Oconee County, and I'll be the first to tell you that. However, this represents the lowest 5 millage rates for operations in the state of South Carolina. So I think right now, it went from 73 to 71 districts with some consolidations around the state. These are the bottom 5 of those 73. What was striking to me doing this analysis is that when you look at our counterparts, 2 of them are oceanfront, a major oceanfront property. One of them's got Clemson next door. And the trend for their millage has actually been increasing over the years. So that indicates to me what actions they're taking to maintain those salary schedules that we are up against. In a history of the requests of the school district, again, I would say that our philosophy is to be fiscally responsible and educationally sound. I think this would speak to the fiscal responsibility, and I think we now have concerns about the educational soundness. We brought a request that was funded and granted 2 years ago for $1.8 million. That ultimately led to a reduction of the millage by about 4 points. Then last year, a request of an increase of about $2.2 million that led to a decrease of about 3 points. So over the course of the past several years, we've seen a precipitous decline of 7.4 points. And in current days dollars, that would constitute $3.5 million. Because the growth of the mill has so vastly outpaced our requests for funding. So I think in hindsight, if we could go back as the district, we may have asked for a little bit more to keep up with the growth of the mill. So this, I think we're all in recognition. This is larger than the requests of the past years. We view this request as something that is necessary for our continuity of our current operational structure, especially in this marketplace. So again, it's an attempt on our part, to the best of our ability, to hold stable ground with the growth of a mill. You know, I will tell you, I'm not the expert on how millage is calculated. I can recognize the trends. I can look at what our budget has received or generated. And so, you know, to the best of our ability to estimate, that is our intent with this request. I've also added in here a state versus local share formula. So this is something that gets shared with the districts and the CFOs. What it shows is based upon the real property wealth of a district as the state views it, what the state expects as a local versus a state share of supporting the cost of education. And so you can see the lowest district in the state in terms of local expected effort is Lexington 4. So there would be an expectation that 93% of whatever their effort is going to be supported by state funds. Out of 73 school districts last year, we were the 6th lowest, so we were 68th. So, you know, our blessing or maybe our curse is that we do have property wealth here. And so when the state puts out these scales and these wages that they're proposing, they would expect that 41% of that effort comes from our locality versus the 59% that comes from the state. And that's largely based on our index of tax-paying ability that they will publish to us each year. So to give you a summary of what the ad valorem, because we're talking now about what is SDOC's request for ad valorem tax collection. In fiscal year 22, the collection total was $50,942,000, and these are our audited figures. That would include the Duke assessment valuation, so there was an escrow payment that was received by the district. So again, that would be overinflated from what you would consider normal operations. At the end of fiscal year 23, that sum was $50,550,000 or so. And then current year, our budget is $49.7 million. Through February, on our books, we're close to collecting that. And again, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know exactly how this year will track or be different from last year. But to the best of our guessing, it would generate close to or around $53 million. So our thought in terms of formulating a request to the council was looking at the growth trend the past few years in total assessment. And I know that there are variables that total assessment does not equal a mill. I know that there are things that have to be computed, and there are arguments and revaluations. But that general growth trend is going from 6% to 7% to nearly 11%. So that is an accelerating growth trend. And so this year's request would represent our rough approximation of what we believe we will stand to collect this year, plus a 5% escalator, or a multiple of 5% going towards next year. So what constitutes our budget? 88%, 89% of our budget is people. So, you know, when we have the state put out scales, that impacts 90% of what we do. And we want to try to be as competitive as we can. I've included what the initial house projections are for us for state aid. And you can see we would stand in classroom aid to gain about $2.4 million, and state aid to classrooms a little bit less than $300,000. Those are the items that are intended to support the teacher scale. If we were to apply what teacher scale the state has proposed, it would well exceed $5 million for our teaching staff alone. So, you know, they would intend that we have some local supplement based on that local share calculation. But that also is intended to include the 11% increase in health benefits. So the employer contribution to health benefits is also going up 11% from last year to next year. So again, that in our estimation does not match the efforts that are needed in order for us to maintain our competitiveness. You can see that there's substantial growth in salaries and benefits. Again, that's the majority of our budget. One of the items there is purchase services and supplies and materials. Again, that constitutes our continued effort for sustainability of our one-to-one instructional program. That means instructional technology for students. That means the assessment programs we use and instructional programs that we use. as well as an inflation index for utilities. And I will be the first to tell you, what I would call a risk contingency in the budget, we have been eating into that risk contingency in order to maintain our fiscal responsibility. So this represents our best effort to continue to break even, not so much support any risk contingency in the budget. By area of focus, you can see instructional expenditures. So instructional expenditures means the folks that are in classrooms directly instructing or guiding students through instruction. That is the largest increase in this budget. Then you see in support expenditures, and again, we would refer to that as admin or administrative costs, but administration really represents, so the staff positions that fall into that category are social workers, guidance counselors, nurses, psychologists, career counselors, and the list continues. So, there's probably 30% of our staff, if I were to take a rough guess at it, actually fall into what we would categorize as administration in a state report. So we're referring to that as support expenditures. And then the undesignated category is basically our support to pupil activity or other community programs. So the next steps, we're awaiting revised school aid projections based upon the Senate budget version. So if I go back and look at these projections from the state, we learned on Friday that we thought this was not great news to begin with. The Senate's version would remove $30 million of statewide funding, so these numbers would actually be our best case scenario. Based on our enrollment, we take a 45th and 135th day enrollment number and send that to the state. If that varies based upon where we started the year, there can be a reduction to these items. So again, this is our best case of we hope to recoup this amount of revenue from the state. We may not, and so that needs to be considered when we put together our budget proposal. So again, I would iterate. I think it's recognized by myself, Dr. Thorsland, I think our board in unity, that this is a larger request than we've made in the past. And I think that I can speak for those involved that believe it is a necessity for our continuity of operations for this request to be made, so it's not made lightly. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about the presentation.
Any questions? I have one. So how much is your unassigned fund balance?
Our unassigned fund balance right now is about 27% of budget. That constitutes about $30 million. We've got a board policy that requires us to maintain that fund balance at a minimum of 20%. The reason for that is the continuity of cash flow. So because we're so reliant with our local share on tax collection here, our state aid payments do not support our payroll for half of the year until those collections are rendered to us. And my concern, I think, when you look at budgeting for the future or year over year, is we need to generate a surplus. So if our budget is growing 7%, 8%, 5%, whatever that percentage is, we need to maintain a surplus to keep fund balance pacing at that percentage of budget. So if we were to go with a break-even budget and not have a positive variance in any given year, or not have a surplus, we would be working backwards. And we would then have to ask for enough here or make enough cuts to recover from that before we could then make positive momentum again.
I would just comment that I guess early in my career in the school district, we did have to get TANs, tax anticipation notes, just to make payroll October, November, December, before the largest amount of the tax payments came in here, in January. And then, of course, we can pay those back, but we'd much rather have a fund balance large enough to not have to borrow just to make payroll in the late months of the year.
Yeah, and I would equate, utilizing fund balance to pay a recurring cost. I would relate that or equate that to pulling money out of your retirement account to buy groceries. Our goal is to have recurring operational revenues that can support our recurring operational expenses, or that structure and relationship is really problematic.
Questions?
So y'all's millage value, calculates different than county operational millage, but what kind of percent or what kind of increase do you expect, I guess?
Our expectation or our best guess would be to remain where we are or potentially end up tied for second with Pickens.
I was talking about the value of the mill that you estimated the increase to be, that you based your budget.
Oh, yeah,
That slide that shows the growth the last.
the value of an operational mill for the school district?
correct.
480,000 or so is the most recent data that I was privy to.
And if you just look at the growth of previous 3 years, 6.25, 7.12, 10.93, and that's kind of like a year in arrears when that actually shows up. So, I mean, we would anticipate the way inflation's been going, we anticipate that going up again this year.
What are you operating off of this year? What's the value of it? I don't remember.
I believe it's 470.
Any other questions?
Couple of things that we, have seen over the last few years that are kind of, definitely have made some changes, but not anywhere close. Bus driver salary, I mean, if you're, part of sports teams like I am, and you have a lot of people that that drive buses, you understand how vital that is to the day-to-day operations across the board. And some of the sacrifices that the bus drivers are making just to make sure that everything is going like it is. So, I definitely see a larger increase coming in there because the demand to the drivers themselves, to what they're required to do, because you can't really have a second job anymore. A lot of them will work a couple of hours during the day, but it is a demanding job, especially those that drive sports buses. It's a long day job, so I definitely see some increases coming in there. Without that, we're not gonna be able to transport the majority of our kids. So I think y'all are doing some good things in there, need to continue that. Teacher salaries, when you sit there and look at the cost of education and the choice to go into being a teacher, the education cost has skyrocketed. So I think we're going to slowly see to where your entry-level teachers is gonna be in that $60,000 range in the next 5 years, in my opinion, to be competitive in the environment that we live in. So, some of the thought processes I've had is when we haven't, captured the growth moving forward, it's gonna lead to a tough decision that it's either gonna be, well, council has to decide on a tax increase or, quit dropping millage back. There's that common, place that we have to be, together, and I think y'all are doing a good job on the budget, but when it comes down to teachers and salaries, that's probably 70% of your actual budget. That's
All employees are 90, or 89, so
89,
it's,
yeah.
for
So
sure.
the majority of your budget is salaries. So, so it's not in a world of cutting people, it's in a world of making sure you're competitive and keeping people in, being bus drivers and being teachers, being custodians. As you see in the employment world, it's not that hard to go out and make $50,000 anymore. Being a teacher is a tough job, it's a mission. So I think we're headed in the right direction. I hope the state, continues their talks, what they're doing, so the burden doesn't come solely on, percentage increase that y'all are needing, doesn't come solely on the tax, citizens. We got good growth in Oconee County, so for the residential, people, the burden to the school district's not so high. I think we're headed in a good direction. So,
Yeah, I pulled I've got a late model SUV bought a couple of years ago, $40,000 or so. I pulled my tax bill because I was curious. So I said, if I calculated this at the rate that our neighbor or counterpart next door is at, what would that mean to me? And it was about $1.70. So, I recognize that we want to be as conservative as possible, but I think our viewpoint and the viewpoint of the board is we've gotten to a point where it's the conservative requests that we have brought are becoming detrimental to operations.
And, yeah, and I like the term conservative is a good term. We should be conservative with taxpayers' money, but we've got to be competitive. And if I can point you back to those slides, just to reiterate, we're not comparing ourselves to Greenville, the Lexington districts, Charleston. That's not where we're making our comparisons. We're comparing ourselves to the 5 Anderson districts and Pickens. Where could a person live and go work? And somebody could live in Oconee County and go work across the lake in Pickens, or, you know, a little south and work in Anderson. So we're trying to stay competitive there. Now, if you look at that dark blue line, we're at the bottom of those, and we can't afford to let ourselves get in a position where a teacher says, you know what, I can go work in Pickens or I can go work in Anderson and make $1,500 more. That, we just can't get in that place. We want to be conservative yet competitive.
Yeah, and I would add to Dr. Dorsland's point, this wouldn't represent an effort to surpass anybody. This would represent an effort to begin to gain ground on them, from our estimation.
Maybe slightly above the average in the 7 districts in our 3-county area. And that's where we think we need to be. We want to be, we tell all of our employees, I bragged about just those charts that Mr. Schickling keeps up with, because I want to tell our employees, we want to be competitive so that we can say to everyone, we're being fair, we're examining the competition in the local area, and we want to pay you competitively, because there are advantages to living in Oconee County. This is a great place to live. Just the natural beauty, the community feel, there are a lot of advantages, but we still have to be competitive with the way we compensate, and that's what we want to be.
This doesn't include, I know Pickens has got some increases that they're proposing as well. This is based on where they're currently at right now.
That's all we can compare on
Yes, sir.
until budgets are passed.
Yes, sir.
I don't know what Anderson's doing. I'm sure
Right.
Anderson's probably doing the same.
So he mentioned to you that last year, we felt like we were making enough of a change with bus driver salaries to where we were going to move up and be above average. But they're going through the same processes right now that we are, and we underestimated what we needed to do last year.
Yeah.
And
I
we
think the
don't.
growth in revenues that's coming through is enough to meet the demands of what we're all trying to do together, which continues to keep a very low tax burden on
Yes.
citizens, which is good.
Agreed.
Yes, sir.
I think you're within that. But again, if you don't do it, Pickens is gonna, once you see this next year, instead of 0.83, it's gonna be 1.83.
Yeah, I know Pickens had their first read a little bit before us, so I read the paper and saw 7.9% from them. There's a confluence of events happening in education right now that make this very difficult, because the state had separated funds for nurses, for career counselors, and what the state did was take all of those different sources of revenue in those different funds and roll them all into the general fund and give us one block aid. So it used to be 27 line items, now it's 1. So now we can't see the detail as what's going on in Columbia in terms of how they're manipulating that. At the same time, the ESSER funds are ending now this fall. So, I've seen around the state and around the country, districts are dealing with, well, we were offsetting some cost with ESSER, and those costs can no longer be offset. So, very difficult. It's not your typical, let's take 2%, overlay it, and run with it. Very difficult to peg what our neighbors will be doing.
Any other questions? Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see, next, with audit presentation, we've had to postpone due to applications, so we'll go into the discussion items, fiscal year 2024-25 budget presentation and discussion. Ms. Brock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Budget Finance Administration Committee. We'll begin at the beginning. I do want to echo a few things, though. One, the salaries, last year we did some incremental salaries across the board. Then we found our neighboring counties did staffing studies, and our increases were minimal, and theirs were exponentially higher for certain trade skills. I think there's just a change in how the working world is operating, just echoing off the school district sentiment there. But with salaries, I want to open up, because last year at this time when I came and presented my first round of budget to you, we had 67 open positions. 67 about a year ago today. Because of the efforts of council, today we have 22 and a handful of part-timers. That is huge. We have more staff on the ground today than we have over the last 4 years consecutively. And that's a big leap for our ability to provide the services to the citizens and meet expectations. So before we dive into the numbers of the budget, I don't know if y'all remember picking up on the last time we met. We did not go over specifically the general fund as much because at that time we had just received in the departmental request for the upcoming budget year. You're good to go back one. There we go. So there is a cap for expenditures on the current year budget. And we wanted to go over this to explain what this cap is, what it means to this current budget, and what it may mean for budgets moving forward. It's pretty self-explanatory, but just very briefly, I'm going to go over the 21-22, 22-23, 23-24, and the anticipated 24-25. All of those are color-coded on the top of your sheets here. So basically, the cap is we can reutilize previous year's unexpended revenues. What that really means is you're allowed to go back and capture things you didn't need or did not utilize at the time. At this point, Oconee County for 24-25 has 5.39 mills that are capable of being utilized, and that translates to an 8.94%. Now, with that cap comes along the anticipated revenues that would have to match those anticipated expenditures, which is why when you look at the budget and we start to go through this in a moment, you'll see that we did not in any way attempt to capture that 8% because there's no way to realize the revenues associated without us having to dip into the fund balance, which is not something that I would advise that we do. Questions on the cap, uses and functions? Perfect. Page 1.
When you speak on the cap, are you talking about the budget ordinance?
Ordinance
cap,
2024-10, yes, sir.
Which is the budget
The limitation ordinance.
limitation ordinance that was passed.
Yes, yes. And keep in mind, that limitation cap was specific to the general fund. It was specific to the general fund, so all of your capital and special revenue funds were unaffected by that and will, over time, develop a fund balance to match the needs of those special revenue or capital funds. So just the general fund summary, is there any way we can zoom in tiny little bit? Just for anybody that needs to see, because I don't think we printed extra books. So this is a pretty broad picture of where the money comes from. And you'll notice here that the property taxes, by and large, are the largest percentage of revenues received by Oconee County. Please keep in mind those property taxes involve many factors of property taxes, including vehicles, homestead, etc., and that residential taxes are 26% of the 28% of real estate taxes realized. The second is intergovernmental. This year we learned that we're getting an additional $200,000 from the local government fund, which is a state aid to subdivision for state-required operations inside of county functions. An example of that would be the Register of Deeds and court systems. License permits and fees. There's a significant increase over the past 3 years in this. This is directly related to user activities. This is not a tax. So if you're not building a house, you don't pay a building permit. If you're not building a subdivision, you don't pay a subdivision plan review fee. Charges for goods and services obviously is charges for goods and services such as park fees, interest and investment income. We just did a budget revision a few weeks ago to address that. Miscellaneous and other could be anything from a credit card refund to someone making a donation. Other financing sources. This is unrealized revenues that we may be receiving through grants, such as tonight you will be approving the expenditure of funds on the regular council agenda meeting that are not county money. But those monies have to be approved in the budget process to come in, and they have to be approved in that budget process to go back out. Use of fund balance, that was in 2023 for the apron expansion at the airport for a grant we were told we were not eligible for, but somehow got really, really lucky and ended up receiving. Allowable increase per ordinance 2024-10. This is a new line item. This is nothing you have seen on your budget documents in the past. This is the anticipated amount for the salary implementation. There will be a point in time where council must choose to utilize growth, decrease the amount for the $2 million, or for us to work through the millage process to realize that. The only reason I went through this entirely specifically is at this time, we are not recommending a use of fund balance for that. As you saw from the school district, and it'll come later in my discussion as well, the growth realized for non-residential structures in Oconee County may very well capture this needed amount for the staffing. Any questions on where the money comes from?
Yes, I got a question.
Yes, sir.
So our budget for interest and investment income for 2024 was 1.5. You know what the Federal Reserve is going to do, you should retire. Because I don't know what he's going to do with rates. He came out today and said, well, rates may stay higher for longer. But shouldn't we be conservative? I don't know how we're going to earn another $500,000 when, unless you have a crystal ball with the Federal Reserve, we don't know what rates are going to do. Rates could go down 2% over the next fiscal year, our fiscal year.
Yes, sir.
So should we be conservative, at least budget of 1 point, and I realize 1.5 was too low this past year, but that's because interest rates have been so high.
Right. That's an amendment we can most certainly make.
That's just my opinion. And I sure don't have a crystal ball. I sure wouldn't be here. I
Well, if
don't know what the Federal Reserve's gonna do.
if you're budget for something and don't realize it, then you're diving into your fund balance to pay your bills. Done a good job over the last several years of not expending 100% of our budgeted revenues, which has been a blessing, because kind of what I keep hearing from last year's budget is we may have to use fund balance, we may have to use fund balance. And to me, you know, I'm sitting here when you don't really know what the true outcome of certain things are until they get passed. And to me, that's what I have spent the last 3 weeks trying to figure out when the ordinance 2410 got passed, what it's actually going to do to the way that we budget in Oconee County. It's not going to necessarily be conservative if we're constantly throwing funds out of the general fund to try to keep the general fund low. And quite honestly, it's confusing for me that knows the budgeting process, because when you look at the general fund, the budget 2024, the budget showing 60 million, well, it's really not, because we have all these new funds set up. So we just have to be cautious. If we go back into 22, and I asked Ms. Brock this question, under other financing sources, you see a huge increase from 21 at 800,000 to 2,893,000, and $1 million of that was a grant that we got for fire and public safety. And I think Ms. Brock has touched on that tonight, that sometimes the money that's shown in the general fund may look like an increase, but it's actually money that we've received for grants, which is still taxpayer money, but the growth in the general fund isn't occurring because of residential taxes. And I think that's one thing that we can all be proud of, is that our residents are not funding a huge part of this. This is spread out over industry, 6% homes, and I think it was said 25 cents on the dollar comes from people that live here, which is, you know, again, something we should all be proud of. So when we talk about keeping taxes low for our residences, that's the biggest thing that we're all doing together. But when you have a budget ordinance that's limiting revenue and user fees, you just have to be cautious with who's gonna pick that up. And so I'm learning what the budget, I did not vote in favor of that budget ordinance, but I'm learning exactly what it's doing, and to me, it's gonna put us in the world of a lot of budget amendments and possible use of fund balance, which is not sustainable budgeting moving forward. So again, I'm learning about what that conservative budget ordinance actually is, because I don't think it's conservative, I think it's, limiting what you can do if you're just throwing additional money over to additional funds to make it look like you're being conservative. So I'm a little concerned with the fund balance, constant talk of that, because that's where we were at 8, 9 years ago, and it was not the proper way of budgeting. Funding 2/3 of salaries with the hope that you had growth in the next year. I think Ms. Brock brought up something that is something that's great, is we've gone from 67 employees open down to 27. That's huge. That means council's doing the right thing, putting the raises in there. We're maintaining, which means that we're providing better services, for our citizens. But we're also spending more money. So when there was times when we could put some fund balance back, because we had openings, we're not gonna have that anymore as we move forward.
So going back to the $2 million interest, I propose we reduce that to be conservative.
Ms. Brock, what did y'all, let me find it. Is it just the interest rate, or is it the amount of funds that's actually invested now? Because I know that's more than it was a year ago.
That's correct. So it is the diversity of the type of interest collected through the state pool.
Still think we should, the state pool is based on the Federal Reserve rate.
Yes, sir.
Federal Reserve, I mean, here again, who would know what the Federal Reserve's gonna do? Powell said today it may be longer before he reduces rates. Inflation's ticking up. I heard today that shipping costs are going up 10 times because of what's going on in Israel and Iran right now. That's gonna affect all. Groceries up 22 to 25% from 2020 to 2024. Compound interest, compound inflation, it's not gonna come back down.
No.
Groceries not going back down.
No.
But interest rates will eventually go down because the economy is gonna go down at some point. They're forcing it down. They want the economy to go down, the labor force to decrease, unemployment rate to go up, and then they'll start cutting rates like mad. That could happen in the next 6 months. Who knows? But I think we should be conservative. We should not overestimate.
I made a notation, yes, sir. Any other questions on where the money comes from? Comments, concerns on where the money comes from? All right, awesome. Let's go to page 2. Let's look at where the money goes. The money goes primarily in the product that Oconee County has, and of course, that's service. Outside of the rock quarry, we don't make a product, we are the product. Our customer service is the product, our road repair patching is the product, our emergency services crews are the product, your 911 is the product. Again, the product is human capital. A large portion of county funding, about 48 million of the 63 is entirely in salaries. As usual, the largest chunk of that is for public safety because Oconee County has a priority on all public safety. Coming in a close second and third is public works and transportation, also related to safety. Actually, can we go back one? I meant to highlight on that. Mr. Davis, I got hijacked. Here we go. So the allowable interest for ordinance 2024-10, here the light blue in the center of the page, you'll see the allowable increase is 8.94, which means we could go back and recapture that lost revenue and lost expenditures that we didn't receive or didn't realize during the years of collection for that percentages to be added up. But you'll see the millage increase limitation is 5.44%. Our proposal in this year's budget is utilizing an additional 0.28%, which is roughly $168,000. There may be an amendment to that if we determine that we need to lower that interest income rate based on Mr. Elliott's comments. But just to let you know how very conservative that estimation is for us approaching the allowable usage of previous years. Thank you, Jen. Again, these are the department, division expenditures. Nothing significant across the board. You'll see that we haven't seen anything that was irregular, high or low, in what we anticipated for revenues or expenditures.
Where, you have salary increase 1.2, where is the other part of the funding? Because last year's budget only included partial funding for the new positions.
That's the totality of it.
So the totality, the other 1.260,362 is the other side of what we did not budget in last year's budget.
Correct.
Okay. So there's not a increase for the salary study that we're going through right now?
The 2 million is the estimated amount that we have received from Evergreen. That is the company we're utilizing to conduct the salary study. The 2 million was a firm estimate, and I do quote there, for budgeting purposes.
Does that include public safety?
Well,
Sheriff's office.
400,000 for the sheriff's office, 100,000 for fire and emergency services, since both of those divisions were excluded from the comp and wage study.
So is that in the 2 million or not?
Yes, sir.
It's in the 2
It
million.
is. Just of note too, the estimation for the value of the mill, again, this is an estimation conducted in the month of April. As you all know, millage is set in September. That will need to be reevaluated as the millage is set in September. We do work very closely with the assessor and auditor's office for the countywide assessed values and for the anticipated estimated value of a mill. For current year, our estimation is $660,000, which is roughly $20,000 more than the value from last year, and this does not include the entire growth.
So we don't believe it would be anything less than 660,000.
No, sir, at this time, I don't have any reason to believe that. And the auditor is here, so I can get a head shake if I need it. Yes, correct. Perfect, thanks.
But if last year's salary increase was 1.2 million and we only funded 2/3 of it, and you're saying that the salary increases this year is 2 million with the salary study and gathering the rest of the new positions that we put last year, that just shows that that doesn't make, maybe I'm missing something here, but that just doesn't seem like, we only funded 2/3 of last year's new positions, and we filled the majority of those, which is, gotta at least be $1 million of that. We're only putting $1 million forward for this year's salary increases?
No, sir, new positions were funded at 50% last year. Increases for boots on the ground were funded at 2/3. The new positions, I believe, was 13 last year, 13 new positions. The 2/3 funding was for the increases because we had a budget amendment that wasn't completed until September.
It was late.
Correct, which would have been a 2/3 funding, but it was 100% of the remaining budget year, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, because the budget was done so late, we didn't get
Correct.
the full raises because we just
Correct.
couldn't get a budget together.
Well, it was together on September the 19th. It
So
was
the money
final.
wasn't realized by anybody, and we didn't pay anybody because we didn't get the budget done when we should have. We got the budget done late, so we actually technically didn't fund what we originally were going to fund.
So
If we had done the budget in June, we
in
would have,
June, there was a 3% across the
Right.
board cost of living increase.
which would have probably been another $1.3 to $1.4 million of salary.
I think it was 997. That's straight from memory, so please don't mark that as gospel.
So your increase in public safety of approximately $3 million,
Yes, sir.
that includes the 1/3 or whatever it was that we did not budget for the sheriff's office and all that of these increases. Is that correct?
Correct. So public safety, keep in mind, we had an additional 9 firefighter positions that we did not hire until after September because Bounty Land wasn't complete and the training academy wasn't open for that round to come through until December. So a large portion of what you're seeing in the public safety sector was all of the wage increases inclusive for every single person who works under the auspice of the sheriff, plus emergency services.
Obviously, since 23, non-departmental's gone down $2 million, but that's because some of those funds were moved over to fund balances or
To
creation of new funds.
specified millage funds, yes, sir.
Okay.
And we'll go through those millage funds and special revenue funds
Right.
here as well. I probably need to grab my phone and make sure I don't go past. The gist of it is, though, once everything got flattened out into the special millage and special revenue accounts, you'll see that there's not a significant difference in what we anticipated to see for the general fund. And that included anticipated revenues coming in. There was no significant jump and there was no significant shortfall. Expenditures going out, no significant jump other than the implementation of the salaries, and no significant increases going out despite the fact that things seem to be continuing to increase. We're just finding better ways of managing. You'll notice on transportation, just a note, that one appears to be pretty flat on paper, but in real life, remember, we added a mill to the road maintenance fund, and y'all be voting on the paving contract tonight, so you're realizing some money elsewhere, even though it's not coming from this specific fund. Again, a $200,000 plus or minus increase for the local government fund, which comes through the state aid to subdivision. And then 1 mil transferred in to the general fund from the economic development fund. The rationale behind transferring the mill in from economic development fund is 2 meetings ago, we approved the rural development agreement through the SC Power Team for the grant match funding for this Exit 4 sewer expansion. So that money has to be allocated to economic development purposes. They'll get $600,000 current upcoming budget year and $600,000 the next budget year. On the 3rd year, that payment amount is $200,000, and that mill may be moved back at that time. Jumping to page 24, unless we have questions, comments, concerns here.
When will we see the actual salary stuff?
I have a meeting with Evergreen tomorrow. I should have a better date for you. I can email everyone if there's a better updated anticipated date. We're looking at probably late spring. I don't have a date for that, I'm sorry.
Then we'll all see it at the same time, right?
Yes, sir. Just a notation, this is for council and the benefit to the public. There are tons of backup documents related to departmental expenses that we hadn't done in the past. We want to make sure that the expenditures by department, Jennifer, you don't have to scroll to those. You'll see those on page 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, where operational increases are very minimal. The salary increases were the largest impact to the general fund. Just of notation, it may be more of a curiosity than anything else, but you'll see that we've been relatively flat and stable. And then on the fee schedule, we didn't really address fees in our last budget committee meeting because we were still working with departments for the in-county / out-of-county cost. But at the same time, we started looking at where we thought the county was not realizing its revenues on how much the county was spending for certain services. If you'll scroll down, please, Jen, you'll notice some red on the bottom of the page. We've introduced some new fees in the planning department, specifically related to sketch reviews, preliminary subdivision plans for larger parcels. This is where our staff can have days and days and days of work, and if the subdivision doesn't come to fruition, then the county has lost those days and days and days of work. I don't want to go through these individually unless you would all like me to. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to if you'd like.
Does Pickens County have something similar to this?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
These red mark changes that you're speaking of, Ms. Brock,
Yes, sir.
how do they compare to, say, Pickens, Anderson, Greenville counties?
We're in
For
line
the same
with
type
those.
work?
We're very much in line with those, if not a little bit on the lower end for some of the smaller or mid-size. On the larger ones, we're very in line. The kicker about the subdivision plan reviews and any sketch review is if I, Amanda Brock, want to subdivide my parcel and give Mr. Root and Ms. Ketterman and Christy Hubbard parcels of mine, I don't want that same, I shouldn't kick in a much higher because we don't want to hurt the small guys. You know, this county has always had a history of being able to take up for the smaller of us, the lesser of us, so to speak. But once someone starts coming in and they're looking at 11 to 49 or 50 to 199 parcels, they're taking county resources that could otherwise be allocated to other work.
Generally speaking, that wouldn't be locals doing that.
Well, it could be locals.
Could be, but generally.
At any rate, but the larger the subdivision, the larger the plan, the more resources it requires because it starts to kick back certain regulatory languages. We have setbacks. There's so much more devil in the details type of review that is required. And our planning staff well, we're staffed in planning right now, so we should knock on wood. It's been a very difficult 6 or 8 months, very difficult. I didn't think at the time that it was worth bringing in a budget amendment and springing in new fees while we were working. We wanted to make sure when we presented this, it was something equitable across the board and fair, and that it was comparable to our neighboring counties, so that we're not cheaper than everybody else and becoming so attractive that they come right through another county and want to land here in Oak County.
And understand from watching the planning commission, was it 40%, 60%? A certain percentage of developments that never happen.
Correct.
And so we look back that money, right?
Yes, and we do
If
them
don't
the
charge
same
the
amount
fee,
of
we
work
have to
whether they
pay.
come or don't.
Yeah.
You know, it's a lost resource for us.
So-
And you'll
so
notice
we're
as
gonna
the-
collect these fees up front.
That's correct.
Okay,
That's correct.
I like
And
it.
if you'll, Jennifer, page 25, center of the page, you'll see the red language kind of in the dead center of the page here. It says ordinance revision, no review shall begin until fees are paid. Subdivision applications which make no response to the county comments after 6 months are voided and must be reapplied for. Because that's another issue we have. Someone has a great idea to build a subdivision, they submit a plan, whatever happened on their end, happened on their end, we never see or hear from them again. 2 years down the road, they call and say, hey, Oconee County, we're ready to roll again. Oconee County's like, wait a second, we lost your file, or we're not sure it's updated, or, I mean, we shouldn't have the responsibility of maintaining those types of records for the period of time indefinitely without knowing if they're gonna come back or not. Again, on fees, page 27, 2/3 of the way down the page. Mr. Mize, this one here is directly resulting from a long discussion we had at your Public Safety Committee meeting. I believe that was in March as well. So when we start to look at the cost for the transportation of solid waste throughout the county, we do accept out-of-county waste, and by DHEC regulation, we have to. But we don't have to accept it at the same rate that we accept county waste. So there's an additional $10 per ton added to both MSW, tipping fees, and for the landfill. We have currently a decal system that helps us identify where the company is located. Typically, your larger companies will come in, say Republic. You'll have a driver that comes into the scale house and he'll say, hey, this comes from Clemson University. So we just have a code added into the automatic system now, where if you're out of county, it's gonna charge you a different rate.
Are we gonna progress to where we get to the point where we issue some barcode for their windshield or something?
We have decals now.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Any concerns, comments on solid waste fees yet? I don't want to get so far ahead that we have to go backwards, but I don't want to talk so fast I leave us all in the dust either. 29, Jen. This is the one that took us the longest amount of time. One, we have a rate increase across the board for almost every product at the quarry. Not every product, but almost every product. You'll see most of them, it's less than or equal to $2 per ton. Screenings remains the same, and overburden has gone up at $2 a ton. We also implemented different prices for credit cards because now the county is paying the fees on those. So there's a different price structure, there's a cash structure and a credit structure. So if you're on credit and not necessarily just a credit card, but if you're on credit, you're gonna pay a little bit different. On the far right-hand column here, you'll see out of county. Again, utilizing the solid waste method of being able to identify where the trucks are coming from, what company they're associated with, that out of county fee will it'll belong on their decal, not necessarily their customer. We know right now that about 1/5 of our customer base is out of county. We believe that could be a little bit higher. We haven't been able to track thus far because we haven't had the decal system that allows us to do so. But we're estimating it's about 1/5.
Do we have good internal controls over that cash?
Sir?
We have good internal controls over the cash collection.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We do internal audits as well.
Others not take cash, but I understand.
Yes, sir. We take in a lot of cash. A lot of cash. Not necessarily at the quarry, I mean
It's
countywide.
video monitored and multiple.
And they're more than one person. So if I take in the cash and turn in my cash drawer, I'm not the one that counts it.
Is there independent auditor actually audited that?
Yes. And solid waste.
The worst thing that could do on there would hurt just your residences that come by to get the dump truck, little dump truck or something like that, so. But yeah, I mean, not a lot of cash, I mean, it's.
Typically, if it's, the smaller the truck, the more the cash, or check. We have a lot of people that if they're gonna make multiple loads throughout the course of the day, they come in on their first load, they say, I get number 3s or whatever, they give you a blank check written out to Oconee Quarry. You take a paper clip, you put their check and their tickets together, you put it in a safe in the drawer. When they come back, you get their check out, put that second ticket there, and at the end of the day, you tally them up.
Out of your 10 million in sales, what do you estimate your cash revenue to be?
I don't have any idea.
150,000, something like, it's not.
I would guess higher than that. Out of 10 million? For cash, 1 million. I mean, I could be way off. That's not something I anticipated during a budget discussion. I mean, it's a great conversation
Well, it's just a
and a
thought,
great
it's just a
discussion.
thought moving forward.
I know that when I have worked at the quarry and I worked the scale, out of maybe 150 customers, 15 or 20 paid cash. But you have to keep in mind, someone in a Ford Ranger, you know, their load may be $11. They're gonna hand you a $20 bill. And, I mean, we're not talking about thousands of dollars.
That's what I was just trying to.
You know what I mean? So the dollar amount might be lower, but it's usually the multiple smaller customers that end up paying cash. Page, any further question?
I do, I got one other question.
Yay.
How do we capture, say you've got a citizen that's coming to the quarry and basically buying wholesale, and he's taking the rock within the county and retailing it.
They do that now?
So,
Unless we're gonna set up an external wholesale, but we don't have a requirement for business licenses, so we don't know who it is. And you can argue with Joe all day long. You can drive to his sales yard and he will tell you it's not his. If we want to establish business licenses, that's a perfect conversation. Business licenses, and I'm not even discussing having a revenue resource there, not even taking all revenue off the table, even if the license itself was only like $2, whatever it costs to process the license, you would know who your businesses are. We get, James back me up, probably 20 a week calls or emails asking the county to write a letter of certification that we don't require business licenses is the number one thing most people coming from anywhere else expect. And then when we tell them we don't require them, they want proof of it. It's a strange thing, but if we had business licenses, it would allow us to track and treat those categorically, however council would decide. There are several small wholesale resale yards in Oconee County, not just for rock product, but mulch and landscaping materials and that sort of thing. And most of the people that come to solid waste to get our mulch end up taking it to some sort of resale yard. But there's, it's almost a catch-22. It's a small business. We support small business at the government's expense, maybe another way to look at it. But we do support small business throughout the county, and if that small business is feeding a family in Oconee and keeping them in Oconee, that's just a balance we'd all have to identify and work through.
I'm just trying to prevent, or like to prevent, a larger company using one of these folks, citizens, to circumvent the rates.
It won't surprise me one bit if that happens, but at the same time, I think if it does happen, that's gonna end up being between them and God.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It probably will happen. We can make the best established policies that we can, but if someone's gonna try to bend the rules or go around the rules or just, in other words, just be a bad person, they're probably gonna figure it out. And I hate to be that way.
I like what we've done. I know we've had this discussion before. I know me and you've had this discussion.
Yeah,
Oconee County,
and having the fees was the easy part. We had to figure out a system where we could put the fees into the computer system to where we could separate the material types for in-county and out-of-county. Whether we track them by decal or license plate or W-9 or however. But we modeled what we anticipate to be this after our current solid waste plan. Because of the decal system, we figured we could just back into the similar process.
Do we have any idea, like the out-of-county increase, on any reasonable expectation of what that will do to demand?
No,
Be interested to see the first few months.
it will. It will. I don't anticipate it to decrease demand because even the out-of-county prices that you're looking at here, these increases may seem significant, but we're significantly lower still than our neighboring quarries. Bye, Mr. Davis. I'm gonna go ahead and tell y'all too, if this doesn't work, I'm gonna come back and tell you we tried and we tried our best. And there may be something else, but we're going to do it this way and see what happens. If in 2 or 3 months it turns out, hey, we're losing customers, or hey, we're not gonna hit our sales projections, that may be a conversation we need to come back to. I don't anticipate that to happen. We're still lower than all of our neighboring
Not
quarries.
if other quarries are higher, it's not gonna affect you.
Yes, yes. And additionally, how long do I have?
Well, if you wanna start council at 6, got till 5:45.
Okay. This is where I get back in the car salesman mode. I'm gonna go really fast now and y'all stop me anytime you have a question. Jennifer, if we could just go to page 30. This is nothing new, nothing y'all have seen any differently. You'll see on page 30 of your books, the number of employees approved by council per department. That number, again, going back to our wage and salary increases, we have more boots on the ground per department right now. Those vacancies are down to 22, not counting a handful of part-timers. And this budget does not contain any new positions. As we go into pages 32 to 80, Jennifer, you don't have to go through all of those. Those are your individual general fund department pages. Everything in pink is a cut we've made after we've met with the departments. So I anticipate my phone to be pretty busy tomorrow. Again, most of the departments were just like the revenues and just like the expenditures that we saw on the summary pages. Nothing shocking, nothing extremely high, and nothing extremely low. The typical increases for departments were staff development, because we need an educated and trained staff. We had a lot of new employees coming over the last 2 years, and we want to ensure they're knowledgeable in both the production of what they're doing for their positions and for the safety component. Diesel and gas. Mr. Elliott, I believe this goes back to your comment earlier with the instability with what's happening with Iran and Israel. There may be some changes in crude oil production, which could result in increases. So you'll see, despite the fact that we tried to keep the budget nominal, there are some increases across the board for departments that utilize specifically diesel, because those are the larger departments that utilize a lot. And then the sheriff's office obviously uses gasoline more. So now that we do have the staffing managed a little better and our vacancies are lower, one of our goals this year is to watch overtime a little more closely, since we have more people to spread the work out a little more equitably across the board rather than relying on the handful that are left. We did have anticipated decreases in overtime countywide. Mr. Hart, those are all just the department pages. If there's one in particular you want to ask about, certainly. Okay, we'll go over just the capital ones that changed. We went through the capital millage funds pretty well at the last budget meeting. If there's any in specific y'all would like to discuss, I just want to bring up a couple of highlights here. So the community health, which is a new fund for current budget year, the 7.1 mils. We were able to realize some growth in that fund and change the allocation to Prisma from 1 million to 1.2 million for ambulance service. And at the last here, for the enterprise fund, this is page 97 in your books. Sorry, Jan, am I leaving you in the dust? Mr. Root bought me a strong coffee today. You'll see that we added a position here for an electrician at the quarry. The reason we need an electrician at the quarry is because we need an electrician at the quarry. Half of the downtime that we have is related to a failure, which is closely related to electrical service. Not that the electrical service is bad, but the quarry itself is a grounding lightning rod. Anytime there's a lightning strike from here to Tallulah Gorge, the quarry realizes it. We need an electrician on staff, so that we're not third-partying out that service. So that's a pretty significant increase, because you're going to get what you pay for when it comes to a certified commercial electrician. And we need someone that is capable of working on that type of plant. It is huge. I know I went fast there on the tail end. 2 minutes to spare. Any comment, question, concern? Anything you'd like me to discuss that we skipped over?
Any questions?
I know it's a ton of data. Please take your time, go through it. Our next budget meeting is May 7th at 4:30. That's also first reading that night. We'll bring our laptops in if there are any recommended changes between now and then. I'm happy to discuss independently or with two of you. Obviously, we wouldn't want to have more.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.